Hello, my friends, and welcome to another stream of Adobe Live. I'm your host, Kieran Lewis, and today we have the very awesome designer and owner of Point Studio, Doug Fuchs. Doug, how you doing, buddy?
Good. I'm excited about this.
Yeah,
Doing
wicked.
well.
Yeah, pumped and ready for today's stream, yeah?
Oh yeah, ready to show
Good lad.
some people my workflow. Yeah.
That's what I like to hear, man. I can see we've got folks coming in on the YouTube, the Bahats, as always. Hi, Cody, Robert, Keys, Emily. As always, my friends, this is all about Doug and his design process. So, any questions you have, please get those in the YouTube or Bahats chat, and I will do my very best to share that with him whilst he's in the flow of it. Just a few little admin just to mention. Today is Design Tuesdays on Adobe Live, and here we like to basically cover everything to do with graphic design, learn different techniques, and we'll be touching on all things today, Illustrator, with a sprinkle of After Effects as well. And on a final note, please don't forget, my friends, to follow us on YouTube and catch up at Adobe Live on Instagram too for latest streams and updates. So, Mr. Doug, this is all about you, buddy. Would you like to introduce the lovely audience about who you are and what you'll be working on for today's stream?
Yeah, I'd love to. Hey everybody,
No.
I am Doug, and I am an illustrator and animator out of Seattle, Washington. It's living up to its stereotype today, very rainy. And I do little illustrations and animations like the one you see on the screen, as well as stuff like this. So obviously, I love my bright colors. I work on animations, packaging, brand illustrations, and maps, as well as much, much more. And I've had the opportunity to work with clients such as Pepsi, Disney, Stanley. And so let's dive right in, and I can
Nice.
show you what I'm going to be working on today. So I love some long-term personal projects. They keep me busy and hone my illustration and animation chops in my spare time. So I had a friend, he came out with a electronic song called Blush, and I was listening to it one night walking around, and all I could think of was rocket thrusters pumping and little buttons pressing and just spaceships flying around. I'm a huge sci-fi nerd, and whenever I'm working
Peace.
on my illustrations, I love listening to sci-fi and fantasy audiobooks. So I thought immediately I got to
Nice.
make a music video for this song Blush. As you can see here on the
Very cool.
left, I've done some storyboards already. These are just a few of them. And they're just rough sketches of what I want to do for the animation. And on the right, I did some color boards. Colors are really important for this one
Mm,
because the song is called Blush. So I ultimately want it to get more and more and more pink as
cool.
we go along.
These look great, dude. Just looking at it from an overview perspective is really cool to see the breakdown, man. Really, really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. And here, just a quick sample of a few of the frames that I have done already. And
Mm.
just so you can see the style, you can envision all of this is going to the music, the bass. And
Are you
now we're
gonna
going
do
to
us like a
move.
song demo, like a music, like a a ballad, or maybe not today?
Yeah, I mean, I had the link to the artist up there. It's Juliet or at the Juliet
Okay, cool.
Show. He has some great music. So
Nice.
I'm going to hop right into what I'm working on today. We're going to be
Sounds good.
taking this sketch and going from the sketch, turning it into a vector illustration in Adobe Illustrator. And I even have a nice little color sketch here. I think that a lot of times artists are told no constraints, think outside the box, do whatever, be creative. I actually think
Mm.
the opposite is great. So I think that constraints really help people. So I like to cross my T's, dot my I's, get the colors out of the way so I can focus on the style of the actual illustration.
Nice. It's nice to kind of see like the before and after. Like I love that you got it side by side to give us context of like
Hmm.
how it's gonna look.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just start out here and add a bit of a gradient for the background.
Whilst you're doing that, I've got to read some of these comments because everyone's loving your stuff, Doug, already. I've got
Yeah,
Robert who said, "Cool work." Connor, wow, this looks great. And yeah, Emily saying these are epic. So I mean, we've just literally
sweet.
got 5 minutes into the stream, but it's gonna be a good one, right? I can feel it, Doug. It's
Let's
gonna be
hope so,
awesome.
right?
We've got this. You got this.
So I like to sometimes pull these references even closer so I don't have to keep going back and forth. And I'm
Mm,
just gonna dive in here. I think one of the things I like to think about is um, kind of balancing between the organic, using the pen tool, using the pencil tool, while also just using generic shapes.
Hmm.
I
And
think my
whilst you're
work
doing
can be.
that, what's your kind of? I'm always quite curious to know how folks operate with different tools and sort of gadgets. Are you on a tablet? What's mouse? How are you operating so folks can have an idea of how you're working?
Yeah. So I'm using a mouse right now, and I'm just using the keyboard on my computer. I have tried some other workarounds. A lot of times I'm just using the trackpad, believe it or not. People will
Nice.
gasp at that, but I just,
Oh, we've all got our ways of. I love that we've all got the amount of times we kind of delve into the brains of different creatives on these streams, and it's amazing the different ways everyone has of working, right? And what
oh
works for
yeah.
them. So it's each to their own. It's all good.
Yeah.
We've got a question here from Connor who said, "Was it
Mhm.
sketched in Procreate?"
This was, yeah, but you could also use Adobe Fresco. I've seen
Nice.
some really cool things being done off that as well.
Definitely. These questions. We've got a comment from Keys who said, "Daft Punk helmet star looking nice."
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, there was a lot
they
of, for the
mentioned that.
character design, there was a lot of different references pulled in, but I've gotten that quite a bit as I went through here.
I've got to ask, while you're in the flow of it, do you find like to kind of get yourself into those creative juices, creative mode? Are you listening to kind of, I don't know, like space, not want to say space music, but just anything kind of like galactic kind of vibes, just to, or are you just normal? I don't know, not such normal, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
What
I
kind of
think I
vibes are you
definitely
into?
like some electronic kind of funky music. But
Mm,
I for a while was just listening to this artist's music because he has that electronic kind of vibe to it. So that was pretty
nice.
nice. And so just a quick overview here. I'm using the Pathfinder quite a bit to do what I'm doing here. That's my best friend
Ah, okay,
in
it's always good to know. It's your
Illustrator.
favorite Pathfinder tool.
I do sometimes use Shape Builder whenever I'm working on Illustrator on the iPad, which is
Mm,
a new friend of mine. I actually think I may prefer Illustrator on the iPad for certain things. For example, if I'm doing organic shapes,
mm.
drawing that out with the Apple Pencil is really, really nice.
It's interesting you say that. I was going to ask, do you find that with your line of work and the projects that you do, are you forever kind of on the go, going to client meetings, or what's your kind of setup? Because you mentioned the iPad. I don't know if you're doing it on the train or maybe, not by driving, that's for
It's
sure, but definitely on a train.
in terms
Yeah.
of requirements, I am all virtual, which is really lovely. But because of that,
Mm,
most of my work is split into two sections. So I have sketching and ideation and concepting, and that's really
mm,
intense, brain power work. And
mm.
then the second half of my job is much more just executing. So stuff exactly like this, where I've got my sketch, it's all done and I just have to execute, for 8 straight hours. And so, like you said,
Solid.
sometimes it's really nice to just, there's a little beach near my house. I can go down there, sit at a picnic
Rub it in,
table.
Doug. Rub it in.
But yeah, so there
Nice.
is a little bit, depending on the project, there is some flexibility there.
Mm, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's see my friends, the perks for anyone streaming out in different parts of the world, the perks of having a beach nearby. You can just go somewhere like the beach for inspiration. Very jealous, Doug. Very jealous.
Yep. And so the other thing that I'm always thinking about whenever I'm illustrating for animation is where am I putting things? How am I grouping them? What's going in front, what's going behind. So I actually did some
Mm,
paper cutting illustration back when I was in college. And I think that
cool.
was a nice prep for vectors because it really shows you kind of the layer system and the hierarchy of things. And so
Mm.
whenever we get to step two of this process, it's going to be big to focus on what's on top of what are the overlapping layers, what's going to mask what, because that's how everything's organized for the actual animation.
Dude, that is, I think you're the first person I've ever hosted on here where I've heard them talk about the layers, but using cutout of papers. That's awesome. Like I love like the physical, tactile, seeing something and then action that on the computer. I think that's a very, very cool way to do it. Do you get to keep
Mhm.
some? I mean, obviously, do you keep the layers and kind of look back on it and think of them moving around as like almost like puzzle piece? But do you kind of keep them as like a souvenir for the project itself?
So I mean, like I don't do the paper cutting right now, but
Mm.
I just think it's a good analogy. And yeah, I mean, I have some cool pieces that were done in paper. Um,
Nice.
but
Very
yeah,
cool.
the layers will be very important. I don't use layers for the working. Like right now, the only layers I'm using is a working layer that's set to
Mm,
multiply, so you can see the sketch underneath.
mm,
And then I have just later on I will be layering, and that becomes really key for the animation process.
nice.
And so you see for these rocks, I'm going a little bit more organic. I'm using the pen tool. And so instead of just using basic shapes, I'm going to be coming in here and just using the Bezier handles to create what I'm looking for. I once had a
Mm.
friend, he got into vectors before I did, and I asked him, "Do you have any tips? Do you have any tricks for how to work with vectors?" And he said, "Make the shape with the least amount of points possible, and you'll be good." I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
That's easy. Okay."
That's a solid piece of advice there. Makes life easier too, right?
Yeah. Well, and so much of this is really complicated stuff that,
Mm,
again, I think a lot of my art is just about balance. So obviously the sketch, super complicated, the animation, super complicated. So each
mm,
individual part can afford to be simple. You know, these are just circles stacked on top of each other, but when it comes
mm.
together, it looks really nice, I think.
No, definitely. Really, really cool. We've already got some folks loving the I know obviously touching that a bit later, but the outfit of your sort of space person as well, which is very cool. So
Hmm.
yeah, very, very cool. And you mentioned as well, even going into a bit of your background, that you're into sci-fi as a whole in general anyway. It's not just something you do as a for a job, it's something that you're passionate about. Is that right?
Yep, love sci-fi. I'm working on a children's book right now, and it's dealing with space. That's all I can say, but it's educational and it deals with
Top
space.
secret.
It deals with the space station, the
Nice.
ISS. So
Very cool. For anyone who's for watching now on YouTube Behance, we had a Doug and I had a lovely little catch up yesterday, just for the very first time, and I feel like we definitely geeked out on the different sci-fi stuff that we enjoy. And we thought, okay, for the stream, we need to still keep it very much on brand and talk work, but it was very easy to slowly go off piece and talk about sci-fi stuff because yeah, we like sci-fi stuff here at Adobe Live. But that's very cool you're working on, dude. Very, very cool.
yeah, I checked out that series you mentioned. Um, what
Ah,
was it
Final
called?
Space.
Yes, and I can definitely see the relation.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask, have you ever seen Scavenger's Reign? It's on Netflix. It was originally on
Okay.
HBO. You asked if I listen to any music, and
Yeah.
that was something that I watched. It's an incredible
Okay.
sci-fi animation, kind of like an adult animation. Got some kind
Okay.
of
Cool.
cool concepts going on there.
Well, it's not hard to get me to watch stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sold. I'm pretty sold.
Yeah,
And
jot
hopefully
that
those
one
in the
down.
chat
It's a good
after.
one.
Yeah, there you go, my friend. After the of course, don't leave midway stream. After the stream, that is what you can catch up with some tips from some advice shows to watch from Doug. Very cool.
So I'm just noodling around down here, and I'll spend a bit more time. Again, this is just going to be a sample of my workflow, so I'm not going
Mm.
to quite get to everything, but it will give
Nice,
everyone
nice
a
to see
good
you branch
idea
out.
of each step along the way.
Yeah, we've got questions and comments actually. We've got a question which well, comment I should say, saying looking forward to seeing it come to life in After Effects. So that's a good shout to definitely stay tuned because we will be touching into two different programs. Currently, we are in Illustrator and we're going to jump into After Effects. So if you're not so sure how After Effects works, you will see in a minute. So stay tuned. And a question for you, Doug, from
Hmm.
Connor, who said, "Is this a passion project for you?" Which obviously you mentioned at the beginning, but maybe if, for anyone who wasn't here, who just tuned in now, can you maybe mention about the project itself? What
Yep.
you're working
So
on?
this is a personal project, a passion project. It's something I am not being paid for, um, but it is definitely important to me because I think that these type of projects, they really push the bounds of what I can do. So sometimes
Mm,
I'll tackle each frame that I do. There's probably 40, 50 frames in this animation that need to be animated, illustrated. I will do this exact process 40 times over.
mm,
Don't expect the project to get done this year, but I still think it's really important because I'm able to practice and I'll find different things in each one. I'll
mm,
identify, hey, this character, I need to learn this new thing, or I'll go on YouTube and look up a tutorial And it really helps me to explore in a way where I don't have the pressure of dealing with a client that's breathing down my neck. I can take as much time as I
Mm.
need to get the done.
But I like that. You made a good point about, and it'd be great to know for those watching. Do you, in the chat, do you have any passion projects, things you're working on? But you mentioned before about this idea of having a timeline or even a date. I think that's cool. Like, there's no need to maybe have a date because actually it's something that you do because you do it because you love it, you enjoy it, and also it adds a bit of pressure having that definitive. I mean, it's good to get things done, of course, but then when there is done, then what's next? So maybe it's nice to kind of do something that's ever evolving and if it's a pageant project, right? Things are always going to be jumping on top, which is nice. So yeah, I'm a sucker for passion projects. You're in the right space to geek out, Doug, about all things passion projects at Adobe Live. We're good for it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's super important. So the other thing that I'll say, just from an artistic standpoint, is
Hmm.
probably the most important thing I can think of is value. So, does everyone know what value is? I always think of
There
value
you
as a 1 to 10, right? So if
go. Okay.
something's dark, it's in 8 to 10. If something's light, like this is a 1 to 3, this is like
Okay.
an 8 to 10. And so my shirt goes from a 1 to an 8 to a 6. And I'm constantly thinking of that. And the easy thing you can do is just squint, and
Mm,
it's all about contrast. So things with high contrast, your eye is going to immediately go towards. Things with
mm,
low contrast, you're going to kind of look over. And so there's certain areas in here where, it's kind of in the background. I want the eye to go to the character and a couple of the side elements,
mm.
um, but I don't want it to necessarily go to every single detail. So again, I have so much detail in my work. There's a lot of things to think about where I don't want it to go. I don't want the eye to go right there. It's just kind of an excess detail.
I love that you used your top as like the demonstration. I feel like you strategically wore that jacket. I mean, who knows, right? Just to prove that point. But I love that you brought in tangible things into your point, which is great. And I can see in the chat as well. We've got Emily who also said the art of the squint eye. We all know where we do like it's either the squint eye or the tilted head, right? At like a
Hmm.
slight angle to get it. Yeah, we should do like a
It's like
scrapbook
the
of all
old
the tilt
pencil
heads.
trick. You're finding angles and stuff.
Forever, definitely. We've got some great comments as well. We've got Cody saying loving the great color palette. So am I, of course. And also another question for you, Doug, when
Hmm.
you're in a good place.
I'm in a great
How much
place.
time would you, I love that. How much time would you give to a project roughly alongside your client work? Which is actually quite a great question. That I guess that
Hmm.
mirror of the two things, yeah, client and
Sure.
passion.
I think it really depends on where you're at in your life. I'm big into balance, so there's certain weeks where, work is my focus and my career is my focus, and there's certain weeks where, I want to have good fitness, I want to eat well, yada yada. And so I think that's something you have to take into account. And then the other thing is, how busy are you? So I had a lot more time in my career early on to do personal projects. And it was once described to me, where clients, they look at your work, and it's similar to if you walk down the street and you're looking for a place to eat. If you see that place and it's full of customers, they're gonna want to go into that restaurant. But if it's
Mm,
empty, they're not going to want to. So if you don't have a lot of client work coming in, you should still be working on something, because then you look busy, you're still top of mind on the socials. So it
I
really
love
just
that.
depends on how much time you have to spare.
That's a great response. I love that actually. Yeah. And do you know what's really weird? This is my brain going off piece now, and I think to myself, those
Hmm.
restaurants who pay for people to be outside, if that's a thing, is that even a thing? I don't know. Maybe the sense of trust in the world, but yeah. But I know what you mean. You make a great point. I think it's the idea of keeping creatively afloat. And actually, again, the beauty of when we do these streams is because. And I think we touched on this yesterday, Doug, when we had our little catch up is when we do these streams, not everyone will be watching is from necessarily a design background. It could be people who are quite curious about the creative industry and tuning in to know how things work. So I guess those kind of tips that you're mentioning about doing things to keep yourself creatively afloat, that's great advice for anyone really, in the industry, but also outside too.
Hmm. So I'm just moving on here to the helmet so we can see a little bit of the character. And while I work on this, I'll touch a bit on layering and just the animation process. So the way that I want to think about this character is, and just everything that's going to be animated in general,
Mm.
anything that's going to move, I want to have separated. So as I'm going along, I'm grouping things. So this head, it's going to move as one unit. I'm going to group that. But if I wanted the eyes to move, if I wanted the eyebrows to move, those will be separate. And so with a character, everywhere where there's a joint, so the
Mm.
head, the neck, I'll use again the real life things to show
Thunderbirds.
you, but the
Yeah.
shoulders, the elbows, all of those things are joints. All of those I want to move. I'll group each of
Mm.
those. And I could do a whole class just on character design, so I won't get too much into
That's
it,
for the next
but
stream, maybe. We'll get you back on and then we
there we
can
go.
part two. By the way, that's not classic, that's not like an official thing, but just for anyone watching, when's part two coming out? But hopefully we'll get you back on again. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to. Some people, that's their entire job is rigging characters. So I do not claim to be an expert, but I definitely have learned a
Hey, you know your
lot
stuff.
through these processes. And so the other thing that I've been working on, again, kind of going back to that personal project and exploration, is some of my work has a stroke on it or like an outline, and then
Mm.
some of it does not. And so I've been trying to figure out, when do I include a stroke, when do I not? And I think where I've landed with this project is anything that is focal point, any character, any main
Mm.
object, I'm going to outline, and anything in the background, like those alien foliage and plants and flowers and things, not going to
Mm.
outline that. And I think what's nice about that is it really is another way to draw the eye.
Nice. I love those little tips and tricks, and it's something that maybe not necessarily comes to us straight away until we notice it. But then it's the fact that you're going to this detail, level of detail of adding the stroke, and those little. You mentioned going back to that squint eye that you mentioned about color contrast, but even the lines of stroke and the thickness maybe of how you do that. Do you kind of play around with thickness of strokes around your designs as well? Is that a big part? Or
100%. I think it makes a
mm,
huge difference. And I can even show on this
yeah.
character once we get a little further, like the difference between having a thick stroke, which makes it look a little bit more kitty and cartoony,
Mm.
versus a thick stroke. Like if we go up to 10, that's going to look way different than if we go back to like a 3.
More
Um,
sophisticated. Yeah, it's just a different way of seeing it, isn't it? It's
and even having like
yeah.
a different color, like we could, a lot of times I'll just put a slightly darker color as the outline, and it just kind of rounds off that edge. So
Mm.
yeah, I mean there's 1,000 decisions, and that's the part I love. That's why I mentioned the constraints at the beginning, is there's 1,000 different decisions that I'm making for every piece, and I don't need even more more decisions to make, you know? That's why I don't want
Make
to
your
think
life
about
easy.
color right now. Yeah.
Of
When I was
course.
just starting out, I limited myself to about 8 colors per piece, just because I didn't think I was very
That's a
good at
good amount,
colors.
though. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
quite significant. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But compared to this, I mean, you can see how many colors I'm working with here.
Fair. That is very true. And you mentioned about again, I mean, that's why we do these Adobe live streams so that we get to see your process, but also the person behind the work. So in terms of starting out, what was your background? Did you go to university? Did you study this or did you self-taught? What's your route into this space?
Yep, I went to university. I went to Virginia Commonwealth in Richmond, Virginia, and I was a communication arts major, which was a little vague, but it was essentially anybody that isn't doing fine art, but instead is doing something that communicates a message with the art, which I
Okay.
actually, looking back, think is a great type of major, because I'd say that a lot of what I do is communication, communicating a message for a brand, things like that.
Mm.
And
No, it's
then
good to
I
know.
started
Oh,
out
sorry.
as a freelancer, and I've continued as a freelancer ever since.
It's the life of freelancer. I mean, being biased, obviously being freelance myself, but yeah, it's yeah, pros and cons, right? But definitely more pros. I mean, that's like every profession in the world, but yeah, the flexibility is a big one.
I like it. It's hard work, and you really got to
Mm.
advocate for yourself. But I think that you can guide your career. And I mean, there's even things like I mentioned I do maps.
Yeah,
I didn't do maps for the first 2 to 3 years of my career, and said, I really want to do this. So again, I did a personal project. I put it out in the
nice.
world, and then I started having people ask, hey, can you do something like this for me? And that's how I got into maps.
No, I like that you kind of put yourself out there as well. I mean, it's a tricky one. It's we do mention it before where we have a range of folks that tune in, but yeah, it's like creative confidence can be tricky, right? I feel like in that space, and putting yourself out there. But hopefully, again, for those watching, they see this, you see you're doing your work, and it's nice to sort of share, right, that process of how you got into it, show your work, and you get a feel for, our industry, which is an awesome one.
So, talking about animation and layering for animation, an important thing to keep in mind is how everything's going to sit on top of one another. So, we have a situation here with this neck where this neck is going to bend, right? Like this. I'll put an anchor point down at the bottom, but it's going to bend with the head. And so I have this collar and I need to create two parts of the collar. So I need to
Mm,
create a part up front and a part behind because one is sitting on top of the neck and one's sitting behind the neck. So those are type of the
mm,
decisions that I'm always thinking about when animating. So for example, the way these layers would go is head first, then top collar, then neck, then back collar.
nice. I love that with like years of experience, your mind now kind of streamlines the process of knowing what you, I mean, obviously by doing it more and more, right? You kind of get familiar with the process, but it's kind of cool to hear you kind of how you go into it and
Hmm.
your process is very cool. We've got a few questions here, and by all means, I mean I'm loving the engagement, my friends on chat. So I promise you, I haven't not seen your comments. I'm just waiting to get a nice strategic space in the chat. But I'll throw maybe one or two, Doug, at you when you're
Yeah,
in a
love
good,
to
yeah.
hear.
So we've got a question from Willow. Willow? Did I mention my daughter's name? William. Sorry, I'm in dad brain. From William, who said, "How do you maintain consistency in style and quality throughout a project, especially when working on complex animations?"
Yeah, it can be tricky. I think with style, it's just experimentation. It's doing personal projects, doing your work, and finding what works for you. I think I was fighting so much to try and make art that I thought was cool or that was, in Photoshop or whatever. And I think one day
Mm,
while I was in school, it was like my last week of school, and I did a project in Adobe Illustrator, and I was using these simple shapes, and it was super geometric. And my professor said, "Why don't you do this all the time?" And I was thinking, I can do that, right?
this is
And
a
from
thing.
there, it was like the allowance to, oh, I can make cartoony, silly work. I can make sci-fi work. I can make maps. And,
Mm,
I think people see that authenticity in the work. They can
yes.
see this is unique and this speaks to you. And I think that resonates with people.
That's a great response, and also a great question as well from William. And yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, it's tricky out there, right, to try and keep a sense of maybe consistency and kind of get not thrown off piece by seeing what you see out there. But I think that's the key why, it's not a case of being thrown off piece, it's being inspired, right, by what your fellow creative is working, which is why obviously folks tune in hopefully for, Adobe Lives and things like that. But yeah, it's very cool to hear your kind of background on that.
I think it also depends on your job. That's another benefit of freelance illustration is,
Mm,
you're not a studio where they're dictating. And granted, there's wiggle room within my style. People come to
mm,
me and they say we want it more serious, or we do want line work, or we want it more retro. And then I can steer my style that direction. But if you go to my
yeah.
portfolio, there is a look, there is a style. I don't necessarily think for a anatomy book, I should be the one to do it, right? But
I
if it's
mean, I
kids'
would happily
anatomy,
purchase that. That'd be fun. That would be wild, right? Yeah, but that's the essence of who you are as a designer. And I mean, when I first knew I was hosting, obviously I did my background research, and I can see we've just put your link in the chat for folks to also check out. But the vibe I got instantly from your website was just colors is obviously a massive part of what you do, right? I got that essence very clear on, but also quite fun. I remember saying to you in the chat yesterday, your about picture, which was very very cool. It's just nice to kind of, I mean, we all have maybe not all, but some have about actual photographs, right? I do on my website, but it's nice to have like maybe an animated, which makes you feel a bit more in maybe the metaverse, but just a bit more, yeah, another way of showing the world who you are, which I think is very very cool.
mhm. So we are just about ready to step to the next stage. I think this gives
Nice,
everyone an idea of my process in Illustrator to create illustrations.
very cool.
And I could go through and add as much or as little detail. I think that's another thing. What's your timeline? what is your budget? And that dictates how much I would go through and use the Pathfinder to really flesh out the lights and the shadows.
Mm,
So I actually have the final piece as we step to the next stage. This is what it ultimately looks like once I finish everything.
very cool.
And you'll notice there's a few odd parts, like right here, right? Where I've made a mask. So this is again something you have to think about when you're layering. So when I go in, I have a frond here that I think I want to sway a bit in the breeze. So all of these alien plants, my goal is to have them kind of sway a bit in this alien planet's breeze. The steam, for example. So with all of these, I'm going to need to make a mask because we don't want this bottom section to show up. And that's something that later on down the road in After Effects we'll deal with. But for our purposes, I will just take and copy everything, every individual part, and I will name these layers. So this will just be frond. And then I'll copy this mask. I'll make a new layer. And I will go ahead and put frond mask. And so again, we will do this for everything. So head.
Nice. Just completely decapitated your
Yeah.
character live
Oh
on
yeah.
Adobe Live, but that's what you're doing. That's what you're
It's
doing,
back.
man.
It's back. It's all good.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Panic over, my
No,
friends.
no astronauts were injured in the making
Disclaimer, just
of this
running across the
stream.
screen now. Just
And again, here I can show you exactly what I was talking about. So we actually have this whole torso piece, and I will put that above the neck. Torso, shoulder, and I won't do all of this because it gets a bit repetitive, but you get the idea. Right, shoulder. And so a lot of times you use R for right, L for left.
mm,
Um, and again, here you can see the arm. I have each piece. So we have the upper arm, we have the lower arm, and we have the hand. And if it were even more complex, you could do thumb, pointer, middle,
mm.
etc. So again,
Very cool.
here is everything layered, and you can see my layers now. Everything is
That's a lot of
very,
layers. Okay.
very, very thorough. And again, I think that it depends on the complexity of the animation. I sometimes go overkill because I'd rather have things broken out for myself so
Yeah.
that when I'm in After Effects, I have the ability to flex and say, oh, you know what, actually I do want this arm to move, or I do want this plant to move. But I mean, you could have it just be the plant
Mm,
swaying and this character standing still. But I think just a little bit of motion goes a long way.
I like that. The attention to detail. Nothing gets lost unless
Hmm.
you want it to, which is cool.
And so the things that I'm planning to move are we have these masks covering up the smoke stacks, the fronds. I think I want to move these little glowing orbs. I don't know if they're little alien creatures or bugs or what, but I kind of want them to hover around a bit
Okay.
and something that the character can react to. I put these lines down here in case I want to create some lines from the water.
Nice.
And then I added a little bit of mist to create like an ambient mist.
So
So
much is happening. I love it.
yeah, and it's the
Very
thing
cool.
is you add just a little bit here and there, and nothing
Mm,
should be too in your face because there's so many frames in this music video. The music does a lot of the work. So
gotcha.
what we're gonna do next is we're gonna push everything to After Effects from Illustrator. And there's a number of ways you can do this. I think a lot of people like to just save their Illustrator file and then import the Illustrator files into After Effects. The
Mm,
disadvantage of that is that everything comes in as a flat layer. And so I actually use the Overlord plugin right here. This is something you can download online. And what's nice about it is everything comes in in the same way that you can edit points and colors and everything in Illustrator, you'll be able to
mm,
do the same thing in After Effects because everything comes in as a shape layer. So
nice.
because I have everything in exactly as I want it and everything is grouped properly, I can go here and just grab all my layers and split shapes.
Even that actually looks pretty cool. Just that sort of effect. I know it's just you're just grouping, but wow,
Yep,
that looks like yeah.
I actually pushed this to the wrong file, so we may have to do this again. And you can see it's importing all the files in.
whilst it's doing that, just a
Mhm.
nice mention. So we're about half an hour into our stream. So if you have just joined us, a massive, massive welcome. And we have the very awesome Doug Fuchs, who is an illustrator, designer in the flow of it. And we basically were creating some awesome characters and a background drop, very sci-fi animated, using Illustrator, but now we're jumping into After Effects. So if you have just tuned in, welcome. And of course, any questions, get those in to Doug.
So this is the interface of After Effects. We have just pushed everything from our Illustrator window here. You can see it's very complex. There's a lot going on,
Yeah.
lots of work, and we have pushed it to After Effects. And down here, we have our layers panel, and you can see all of those layers that we had in Illustrator is now in After Effects. And what's really nice is, for example, if I want to edit this head, all of these lines are editable. And that can come in handy with path animations where you're actually
Nice.
animating how things move. So
Very cool.
one thing that I do have to do, the water that I made in the Ultimate illustration had a lot of gradients, and those don't always import well. So we're going to bring this water file that I exported as a PNG in, and we're just going to drop that where the water is. So that is flat, and that's fine with me. I don't need to animate that. And what we're going to do now is we're going to rig everything, meaning uh, we're going to link things to where they need to go. So again, using the arm, right? The hand is attached to the forearm, which is attached to the upper arm, which is attached to the body. And if you get deeper into character rigging, you can make it so that if you move the hand, the whole arm moves. We won't get that far into it,
Mm.
but we will also get rid of these masks. And the way that we're going to do that is we'll find this. And so this stage in the process is a lot of just organization. I think it's interesting because the workflow for Illustrator, I would think of
Mm.
as kind of artistic and there's a lot of creative decisions. I think a lot of the animation workflow is like you're a project manager. So you're cleaning things up, you're
Okay.
organizing everything, you're making sure that everything's labeled properly. And there's even a little bit of, I almost feel like a coder sometimes with the expressions that I'm using. There's a little bit more
Okay.
math. And so again, I think it touches on those two sides that I enjoy, the kind of structure
Mm.
with the whimsical creative. So what I
Nice.
just did here with the smoke is I created a matte. So this is the matte, and I am just dragging it to that mask, and it is saying, okay, smoke, you can only live within where this mask is. So you can see it just cuts off right there.
Mm.
So the other thing that I want to do in this stage is I want to label things. So you can see there's a lot of layers here, and that means nothing to me, right? That is a little bit complicated. So what I want to do is just take and group certain areas, meaning we have the sky, we have the mist, we have the water, we have all the most background elements, and those I'm not going to be touching very much. So what I want to do is let's just, pick a color, any of these colors. Let's make them dark green. And then the background elements, which are these, we're going to make those a separate color. We'll make those sandstone. And all of the character elements, so we have from the right shoulder all the way down to the back collar, we're going to make those purple because he's purple or they're purple.
Color code. The color code in me is loving this right now. Like the color code
Yeah.
of my part of my brain. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And then all of these glows, we want to make those pink so that just in our brain we know, oh, that's pink, this is pink, great. Or fuchsia, we go fuchsia. And so already you can see I scroll down this list and I know if I want to go to the character, all right, purple. If I want to go to the glows, pink.
Nice.
If I want to go to the water in the background, this dark green. And it really helps to segment things
Mm.
out. The other thing that we need to start thinking about a little bit is anchor points. And anchor points are where things bend. So right now I just named all the flowers F for flower or fern or frond or whatever.
Mm.
F1, F2, F3. And I am going to change where this anchor point is. So right now, if I were to rotate this, it's rotating from the middle, but we want it to
Mm.
rotate from the stem. So for all of these, we're going to move things to here. This one's already there. Great.
Whilst
Really
it's happening,
great.
we've got a great comment here saying color
Yeah.
coded and naming layers. This guy is the real deal. He is my friend. So welcome. You're in the presence of a very awesome designer right now. So yeah, keep them
I
coming.
mean, trust me, I definitely have done my fair share of not naming layers and gotten away with it, but I will say
Not
when
for
it
Adobe
comes to,
Live.
well, honestly, even for any After Effects projects that I work on, you really need to
Mm,
label it because you will drive yourself nuts trying to figure out where
the
everything is.
sanity. I bet. Yeah, it's the kind of program where you kind of need to be. I mean, my realm is more InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, but just seeing and getting a feel for how you operate in After Effects, like I feel like you need to have a system in place just to make life easier for you, but also the client as well, right? For any
Hmm.
After Effects folks in the house on the chat, let us know, and also share some tips as well and tips and tricks in the chat. If you're in After Effects, you use it often. Let us know in the chat. Yeah, it'd be good to know. Or you want
Yeah,
to
I'd love to
see maybe
know.
Doug do something with what he's working on. Let us know in the chat, and I'll chat with him directly.
Yeah, I'd love to know if there's a different way that people handle things. That's one of my favorite parts of animation is you have an end goal that you want to get to, and there's three or
Mm,
four different ways to get there and different
yeah.
ways to do it. And it's oftentimes just depends on the style or the project of how do I want to get there, you know?
Mm. Do you feel there's a lot of
So
patience as well needed in a
yes,
program? Sorry, like I was gonna say, yeah, going off
yes.
piece now. Yeah, cool.
Yep. So before I keep doing this, let me just jump ahead and I can show you. This is what a really cleaned up, really nice
Nice.
type of workflow looks like. The last thing that I didn't mention was parenting. And parenting is just exactly what I talked about with that arm. So for example, this frond here, we'll go back to that.
Mm,
You'll see it's parented to Rox M2, and Rox M2 is just this bottom part here. So if I were to move this bottom part, the flower would come with it. So all of this is just making sure that everything operates the way that I want it to operate.
mm.
And so now we can jump into the fun part of animation and just getting things where they need to go. Um, One of the things that I love to do is pre-comp. And pre-comping, again, is just putting some of these layers into a folder. And that helps because it gets rid of a lot of these layers. And it also helps because um, it helps with rendering, which becomes another thing
Nice.
that you have to think about when it
There's a bit of
comes
patience, I
to,
think, comes into it, right?
oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So many memes online for rendering. We all know those.
So let me just, I'm taking all of these plants over here and I'm going to hit pre-comp. I'll just name them plants right. And now when we hop into this pre-comp, hey, it's nice and white. We don't have, all the layers and it's really nice and organized. And now I can go in here and actually start animating a little bit. Um, so we're just working on, this is the timeline. And with this, we're just looking at seconds. So we have 0 seconds, 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, da 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 da. And the way that I work is you create keyframes. And
Mm,
so at second one, you're here. And at second two, you're here. And over the course of that, it moves. It's super
mm.
simple. It's super easy. This isn't frame by frame. And it works way better with my brain. And so we can
Nice.
go in here. And again, I just said I want this frond to sway just a little bit, right?
Mm,
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some rotation. And because we added this anchor point down below, it is swaying from the stem. And so at second one, we're going to set it, let's just say here. That's a bit much. Let's just give it -5 degrees. And we're going to set that keyframe. So this appears here. That is what we're looking at. And we want it to halfway through go to 5 degrees. And then at the end, we're going to copy that original keyframe and it goes back. So now we see it is going back and forth. We have some motion, but it's pretty
nice.
static, right? It's pretty kind of boring. And so we're going to do a couple things to make it a little bit more interesting. So first of all, we're going to use what's called easy ease. And easy ease is just a way of mimicking life. So if I drive in a car, I'm going to start off at a stop. I'm going to
Mm,
speed up and I'm going to get really fast at the middle. And then I'm going to slow down before I stop. And so that graph is going to look a little bit different than just a straight line. So if I add easy ease to this now, the keyframes change the way they look. And the motion just gets a little bit more interesting. It makes just a touch of difference. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add an effect. And effects are great because they take a lot of the work out of it. So we're going to use a bend it effect. And it disappeared, but we're going to get it back in a second. So one thing we can do is find the start place. Put it here. Find the end place. Put it here. And that's just saying where are we bending from and where are we bending to. And then again, we'll set some keyframes. So we're going to start.
Have you got a favorite effect that you like to? I mean, obviously it depends on the project, but have you got like a really go-to classic that you like to dabble in?
I've been loving
Question.
blur. So
Okay.
I've noticed that in my projects, if you add a little bit of blur to things that are closer to the camera and a little bit of blur to the backgrounds, it really focuses in on what you're looking at. And I think,
Okay.
like I was talking about before, in my projects, I'm always trying to, I have a lot of busy scenes. How do I focus in on the stuff that's important? And so I'm actually going to show a little bit of Gaussian blur later on,
Nice.
and just to
Nice.
add a little bit of atmosphere to the piece.
You're keeping the audience in suspense. I love it, Doug.
Got to keep them around somehow, right?
Of course. No, no, they've been. I mean, it's all been all positive chats and the
Good, good,
love
good.
it, and a few emojis as well. I like that. We do like an emoji at Adobe Live, so thank you.
So again, we'll bend it just a little bit more and we can preview this in a second to see how it looks. Do we have many After Effects users?
I'm waiting to find out. We put that question and we'll see if anyone mentions it. But we did have a question from Connor, which I think he's gone, but actually maybe it's still relevant to anyone who's quite curious about it. The puppet tool. Do you use the puppet tool in After Effects? I was asked by, or we were asked by Connor.
I have used it. I don't use it often. I'm actually
Mm,
using a lot of plugins and extensions. Like if I'm doing, a lot of times puppet tools are used for rigging of
mm,
characters so that you can puppet tool, like put a puppet pin here, put a puppet pin here. I found that other expressions and scripts work better
cool.
for what I'm doing. So Limber, for example,
Mm,
Rubber Hose, those type of programs are really nice.
nice. I mean, also, I haven't heard this program in a long time, but we've got a bit of a blast from the past there. But Keys has asked, has Doug ever animated in Flash before?
Hmm
So we're going back
My
now.
first
Taking it back.
animation class was in Flash.
Ah, okay.
I'd
How
love
times
to
have
ask the
changed.
audience, what is your go-to frame by frame animation software? I've heard
Nice.
Animator, um, Photoshop.
Let us know. Yes. You heard it here, my
So
friends. Yeah.
going back to this plant, you can see now it's way better than when we started. It is kind of bending a little bit, and you can even get
Mm.
it if you really want something to bend. You can really push how much that thing is bending. But again, there's so much going on here. I think certain animators would love to go in and make all sorts of decisions with this plant, but this is in the background. This is not important.
Tiny
So
little, yeah,
we're gonna leave it like this. And what's nice is now that we have this, I can go ahead and copy these keyframes over to, let's just say
nice.
this little guy here. And I copied it to the wrong place, and we have to add the start, have to add the end.
Good old copy and paste in place.
And just like that, that is moving to the same motion. And it's going to move a little slow. You can see this green bar is kind of my
Mm.
buffering. But yeah, if I do that across the entire animation, all of my plants are going to be swaying to the wind, and
Nice.
it makes a
They're going to be
huge
immersed.
difference. Yeah. So next up, we're going to take a look at some of those effects that you asked me about. So we've got this front area here. And going back to what I said about value, I kind of lose it
Yes.
a bit right in here. If you squint, I can't really tell if this is part of the water or is this, something in the front. I think it looks good over here, but over here it doesn't look great. And
Mm.
so one of the great things I can do is I can add a brightness and contrast. effect. And I just drag it right onto that layer. And I bring down the brightness to -25. And there we have it. That looks a lot better.
Mm.
I might bring down the contrast a little bit just because things that are out of focus, things that are closer to you, things that are further away, they're going to have
Mm.
less contrast. And then the other thing I'll do is I will do a Gaussian blur. I think that's how that's pronounced.
So we've got the response from Keys you mentioned about back to Flash, as say. Since you asked, I've been using After Effects for quite a while, but Flash even longer than that. It's cool to sort of hear right how folks have their different programs that they like to work with, and in the day we all get to the same deliverable, but it's cool to know what folks are working within.
So that might be a bit much on the blur. So I'll push that back. Yeah, I mean, Flash is kind of one of those. I
I
feel
think I
like
used
it's
Flash
like
back in
a,
my junior days, actually. Yeah.
yeah, it's like a, it's in like the Hall of Fame of programs.
I remember doing like without going too off piece now, like in one of my advertising jobs was like a banner ads, like Mastercard
Hmm.
banner ads that you get in like MSN. If anyone knows
Hmm.
MSN, like going back, say my age now, but yeah, it was yeah. I mean, it's a blast from the past, but it's nice to kind of have these little chats, right? It's almost like when you're in the industry for a while, you start to reflect back on previous programs and even updates as well. To be fair, right? There's so much new updates, and it'd be crazy of us not to mention. Wild of us not to mention, obviously, the AI as well, right, within Adobe and the things that are in place to make life for us so much more easier and streamlined. So yeah,
Yep, I've been playing a bit with the generative recolor in Illustrator,
nice. Yeah.
and it's a handy tool for sure if you it gives you a place to start, which I like.
Mm. Just on that, actually, that's a nice made to kind of mention in the chat. If you are, it's very much your first time watching Adobe Live. Obviously, massive welcome. But again, there's all these different programs and tools and tips and tricks. And if you're very new to it, overwhelming sometimes, but we do have these streams and it makes life hopefully a lot easier for you to kind of watch at your own time and to get a feel into how folks operate in these programs. So yeah, welcome, but also feel free to rewatch some of our awesome streams as well.
Yep, you had some cool streams this morning. I think definitely on the generative AI, they were doing package mock-ups.
Nice.
It's in beta right now, but like if you have a can, you can put a design and it moves to the shape of the
So
can.
much
There's
easier.
some really cool things coming out of Adobe for sure. So a big part of animation, fortunately or unfortunately, is the buffering, is the rendering, and so it's a
Love a good buffer.
lot of good strategery around what do I do while I wait to either be effective or give myself a
Grab
break.
a
But
coffee or yeah, maybe not live on
yeah,
stream, but yeah.
so you can see I've already animated the character. The character's just kind of doing a bit of a movement there. The fronds that we animated earlier doing its thing. And then since while we were talking, I just took this mist. I added a bit of that blur so that it blurs into the background and I made it just move. So at 1 second, it's at this position. At
Mm.
6 seconds, it's at this position, and it just slowly drifts across the screen. I think that's the thing I get the most questions about is how do I animate? Everyone thinks of classic Disney animations and they think that's what I do. And I go, no, no, no.
It's even
Similar.
cooler. There we go. There we go. I love that. Keep them wanting more. I can see some folks have just tuned in as well, actually, because as we're approaching that kind of nearly hour mark as well, so it's a nice time to remind folks who they're tuned into. So welcome, first of all, such as Alessandra. I can see other folks coming in. Also RB, welcome, welcome. And today we have Doug Fuchs, who is working on some cool illustrations. He was working on Illustrator, creating this really cool landscape background on a passion project, I should add. And now I've taken it into After Effects to make it animate. So you're getting treated today, my friends, by two programs. Don't say we don't give you more, but yeah, any questions you have on Illustrator or After Effects, and you want to see Chris, I see Chris pop up, or you want to see Doug work on some stuff, get those comments in the chat, and I will share them directly with Mr. Doug.
Yep. So I think we're gonna tackle this little orb fairy creature, alien creature. We've just been picking our way through. I don't think we're gonna get to everything, but just to show what I go through, I think something that I heard, just like one more little tidbit about animation that I heard recently is
Mm.
again the balance between the slow movements and then the fast big movements, and really balancing that. So again, typically I work on what is the most important action first, which is our character's moving, just like very gradual, like what's that, right? And then I think the second most important motion would be kind of this orb right here that they are looking at. And then all of the secondary, tertiary movements of the plants and things like that, I want those to be slow, methodical, gentle, easy.
Mm.
So we are going to go in to create a pre-comp, which is our best friend. And we're just going to call that. Again, there's no real rhyme or reason to it.
Just for a little fun and games for our folks in the chat. 10 points if you can think of the most creative name for our space person. We don't know who it is, if it's, what background there are, so we're going to keep it space person just to keep it on neutral. But yeah, any creative, maybe design puns as well. That's always a sucker for design puns. Let us know. Have you named your character, by the way, Doug, or have you just jumped into?
So that anybody
Oh, I think there's a slight glitch with your sound. Maybe it's just me. If folks can hear you. Can you say that again, Doug? Maybe it's just me. I can hear you a little bit, but we'll work on that in the background still. But remember, my friend, this is a live stream, so there we go. Things sometimes pop up, but yeah, we'll keep it going. Oh, okay, yeah, no, it's not just me; it's in the chat as well. Folks can. Oh no, we'll have a little quick moment just to kind of rectify that, and we can still see design. So, my friends will be right back in about 10 seconds, so stay tuned. There, you haven't left. I love that. We're back, my friends. This is the beauty of live streams, but we are back. You can hear Doug and we can see Doug, so we're good for it. Let's jump straight back into it.
Yeah, sorry about that. Technical difficulties, but we are back. And so I think I was talking about my astronaut character. I think I wanted to keep it pretty neutral, keep it ambiguous. Originally, I wanted to have a visor where you could see a face, but that would make it hard to make it ambiguous. I wanted everyone to think that could be me. I think the name of the album of the song is called A Place Where I Can Be Myself. And so the idea, the general concept of the animation is it's super simple, right? There's not a ton of plot, but it is an astronaut goes through a wormhole, enters into a different galaxy, parachutes down, like takes a ship, parachutes down to a planet. That's where we enter. That's where this stage is, where the astronaut is on the planet, taking in all the sights and sounds of the alien planet, and then just kind of comes out of the foliage and just sees this vast planet. So it's kind of very subtle sort of deal, and it's more about the music, it's more about the beats and the visuals. But I wanted everyone to think of a place that they could be themselves, and when I was envisioning that, I was like, alien planet in space, where else could you be more
What more could
alone,
you?
right?
Yeah.
But kind of being happy about
Love
being
that.
alone, right?
Mm. Comfortable in your own, yeah, space. That's cool.
So we are animating this orb, and if you are just tuning in, this orb is just a little alien firefly of sorts. So it's super simple. It's just a couple of stacked shapes. And so I am animating it so that it will grow in size just a touch, and it will grow in opacity. So when it's smaller, it's going to be about 75% opacity. When it's bigger, it's going to be 100% opacity. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use easy ease. And here's where all the math comes in, right? So behind the easy ease, you have all of these graphs, and it basically tells you how long are we going to hold on each of these keyframes. So what I'm doing here is I want it to grow, pause, and then shrink, and faster on the small side, slower on the big end.
Cool.
So we can test this out and see how it looks.
I feel like I'm being hypnotized live on stream now. It's it
So that
sucks me
feels a bit
in.
slow. We don't want to put anybody to sleep. So I'm actually going to bring these in. And then what I can do is use an expression. And this is just, I think people ask how to learn animation, and it's really just trial and error, looking things up. Because I don't know how
Mm.
you would ever know these things if you didn't just watch a ton of tutorials, right? So I'm
Of
just
course.
using a loop expression saying cycle through this. And so what it's going to do is it's going to take these keyframes that I just did, and for the rest of the animation, it's just going to cycle through this. And so this should
I
move a
love that
little
we
bit
can
faster.
I was gonna say, I
Go
love
ahead.
that we can go into our sections of each of the sort of segments you're working with, sort of stripped away from all the other assets, and we can really hone in
Mhm.
on this. This is a very cool kind of function on After Effects.
So I think that's good for now. I think it could go a little bit faster, but I'm pretty happy with that. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to take this orb and we're going to use another effect. Effects are our friend. We're going to use a wiggle position. And all this says is kind of do random movements around the screen. And
Mm.
you can control the speed of it. You can control the amount of it. Uh, so we're going to have it do that. And then we're going to just have it float around. So we're going to take that pre-comp that we have. Let's shape this down to size.
We've got a design pun floating about in the chat here, and
Oh,
I
I'd love
can't
to hear it.
not. The inner me is like, we've got to share this. We've got to say it to Doug. So we've got who was it? Oh no, I want to make sure I get this correct. Yes, Chris, who mentioned into the, and it's a play on your surname, but into the future. So maybe there. I mean, my mind is blown, but yeah, just saying. Next
I
album
love it.
could be. I don't know. I don't know, but yeah.
I like Futura as a last name. It's a good.
Ah.
I'm a big pun guy. Really into puns.
Nice, nice. Oh, then you're welcome back anytime at Adobe Live. I mean, you'd be welcome back if you didn't like design puns, but still, it makes it even sweeter that you into it. All
I was
good.
getting my morning coffee this morning, and the
Yeah.
barista was like, "Which one do you want?" And one had a handle and one didn't. And the guy goes, "I don't know if I can handle that one."
The dad jokes. You see,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're not. They're not wasted on me at all. Being a
I
dad
didn't
as well,
make
to be
it.
fair. No.
That wasn't my joke.
No. We've got some names, by the way, but I will share them when a few more pop in. But we've got some names for our astronaut, but I want to drop those in a bit later in the stream. But they're looking good. I'll keep you in suspense, Doug, until then.
Ooh. So I think we talked about layering, and one of the issues is I kind of want this orb to come from behind this tree, but of course it's on top. So all we need to do is drag this layer down to about here, and now, voila, it's behind that tree. So a
Nice.
lot of animation is really tricky and complex, and then a lot of it is just kind of intuitive.
Well, like you
So
mentioned
I'm,
before, a bit of try and
yeah,
error as well, right? Where you have to kind of experiment, see, and then just, yeah,
so much.
make it to the madness.
A lot of times with animation, you can almost film yourself. Like I've seen animations where somebody wants to do a fish, and so they record themselves doing this motion, and
Nice.
then you just upload that to After Effects and you just go right on top, and
Yeah,
it really helps.
makes sense. Makes sense.
So I think what I want this to do is I want it to start down by that tree, end down by that tree, and it's gonna kind of go up to here and then back down. So right now we are just changing up that path a little bit. And a lot of it is trial and error, like you said. So we are gonna
Mm.
let this render and see how it looks. And then we can tweak the speed, we can tweak the keyframes as needed, the path.
There's something quite eerie about just everything's still except for that one orb just floating above his head, and he's just looking direct. Well, they are just looking, I should say, directly at it. Yeah, very cool. Well, what's
Yeah, it
happening
does.
actually? I'll mention some of the names. We've got some of the
Mhm.
names for our character, Futura. To be fair, there seems to be because I think your name is awesome and it has that futuristic. I feel like everyone's honing on that. To be fair, maybe we open the
Okay.
floodgates, but yeah, we've got Voss as another one. Voss. I mean, they
Boss.
said it sounds quite futuristic,
That does sound
futuristic.
cyborgish, yeah.
It's like yeah, very Rick and Morty is. There we go. If anyone watches that, yeah, nice.
So it's looking good. There's a little bit of a
Yeah.
hitch at the end because I don't think that it lines up with the start and the end. So we're just gonna fix that, but I'm pretty happy with that look. Again, none of this has to be perfect because in the grand scheme of the animation, I don't know if I mentioned this, but this is gonna be on screen for about 4 seconds. So just
Mm.
enough for you to take it in, register what it
Digest
is,
it.
and then we're on to the next one, right? That's my
Nice.
secret is don't let them have enough time to process all the mistakes.
A lot could happen in 4 seconds. To be fair, I don't know. Yeah, I like that.
Cool. And then I think the last thing I'll do is I can take a look inside of the character pre-comp. I've already done this because it is complex, like we mentioned earlier. I think that it would be a little much for this stream, but I can give everyone a brief overview of what's going
Yeah,
on
sure.
here. So,
Sounds
like
good.
I mentioned, I use Limber, and Limber is right here. And this is an external thing that connects to After Effects. And all it does is Limber makes limbs. So your arms, your legs, it can even make tails, it can make
It's so
animal
simple.
limbs. Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go. So all I'm doing is I'm connecting, um, you create anchor points, and anchor points are where is the shoulder, where is the elbow? And then you show Limber, hey, the shoulder is here, the elbow is here, the wrist is here. There's art in between that is this upper arm, and there's art down
Mm.
below, and that has the little control panel. So just connect all of that. And what's nice is I can then take this limb and move it around. Or can I? I can move it around and the whole arm will move with it, which doesn't seem like such an advanced, mind-blowing concept. But whenever you go from pixels on a screen to
Of
I can
course.
control a character's arm, that's pretty cool, I would say.
Pinocchio vibes, but on a much grander scale, I should add. Um, just a flag. We've got about just also for you as well, Doug, for
Mhm.
your time frame. We've got 15, well, just about over 15 minutes left, which is actually a great time to mention to our lovely audience. If you have any final questions for that last 15 minutes of Doug and his process, please do let us know. And of course, get those in the chat, and I will share them directly with Doug.
And so you could just see I can move this character all over the place. And I could even make a rig that is more complex where I could control facial expressions. I can control turning of the body. Obviously,
Nice.
this isn't that complex because it's on the screen for just a couple of seconds. And all I want the character to do is kind of, right?
Yeah.
And so we will exit out of that. And the
What a
last thing I'll
great
mention
comment.
is these days, it's really important to think about different types of screens. So 16 by 9 is going to be your monitor. And so that's why I have these guides here. And you can create the guides just through the ruler. But that would be 16 by 9. That would be viewed on a monitor. If you view it on your
Mm,
phone, it's 9 by 16. And so that is that one there. And so I kind of want to take everything into account, including Instagram, square format. And so all of
nice.
the shots that I've done from storyboard all the way up to this, I am thinking about, making sure that the character is somewhat in the center so that I can easily crop in as needed.
I like that,
So,
thinking that far ahead into how the deliverables will be. It's very cool.
oh yeah, yep. So we're doing pretty well with this animation. I can go ahead and show you. This is the final animation once I finish everything, and I can actually bring up the final animation so everyone can see it.
Nice.
So this is ultimately what it will look like.
Very cool.
Oh, see, there's a mistake with the hand. I've rotated too much, but it just gives you an idea of what we're going for with the orbs moving
Uh,
around. Um, Ignore the hand. That hand is,
to be fair, I didn't notice until you played it back the second time round. I mean, folks are much more sharper than me, but maybe I'm sure people did pick up. But I really didn't. Now that's all I can see now, just the hands.
uh-huh. Oh yeah,
But
that's
yeah,
the life of an illustrator, right? You could keep rendering something again and again. You keep seeing
yeah.
things wrong with it, and you have to go back in and play it
The
again.
fingernail. Yeah,
Yep.
it's the little things.
But
It
this
looks like
gives you an
real great though.
idea.
Very cool.
And then I can, in the meantime, I can take some questions and I can hop back to Illustrator and show you one more frame that
Yeah.
I can work on.
We've got some good comments as well. I've got to share this with you as well, Doug, so you know what folks are saying in the chat.
Okay.
We've got Chris who said, Chris, I should say, saying Limber is great. So many extensions, so little time.
Yeah.
I love that. And yeah, again, folks are loving it. Jesse has to say that's amazing. Chris looking awesome, looking great. Yeah, folks are loving what they're seeing, Doug. So keep them coming for that final sort of 10 minutes or so, 15
hmm
minutes.
So this is an earlier frame. I'm just going to hop back to an earlier part in my process. And this is the spaceship. Again, similar to a character design, the spaceship, you have to think about what am I looking for? There's a scene where the ash, kind of the, I'd say the climax of the song where the doors open and the
Mm.
astronaut is propelled out into space. And so I had to think about, where is that door on this smaller ship, right? It's bigger than a car, but it's not quite the Millennium Falcon or anything. So I'm just thinking about like, where is that? I decided it's going to go down here. This is great for anybody that was not in the earlier part of the stream. You can tune into
Mm.
my Illustrator
Nice.
process.
And they can always rewatch as well. We've got to mention that. I mean, these streams are online on the interweb, so you can feel free to always rewatch the stream as well. But yeah, folks, I feel like a lot of folks have been watching from the very beginning and following this awesome journey. So you're in a good
Sweet.
place. You're in a good place, Doug.
Yeah, and if you follow along on my Instagram, I will always be posting updates to this project. Like I said,
Nice.
I am doubtful that it will get done in this year, but that is okay because
That's all
it
good.
is more about the fun of creating than it is about any one piece being finished.
I mean, I'd happy like host you like maybe every year, and then we just keep on doing more of the same project and we just get to a point where it's just like it's evolving to one astronaut to basically a whole family. I don't know, it's on a different planet. I don't know, just
Whole
throwing ideas
series
now at you. Whole series
get picked up by
snapped up by
Netflix.
Netflix. Yeah, wow, that's weird. Jeez, that's the world we're living in. That our brains both intertwined into that. That was wild. That was freaky. But anyway, yeah, off piece. That was really weird. Hilarious. So talk us through what you're doing now.
Yep, so I'm just building these little side, I don't even know what those are, thrusters. And again, like I mentioned before, I built the body of the ship using the pen tool. Right now, I am just using simple shapes like circles and just stretching them, moving them around. And I mentioned earlier that I really like the balance between those two because my work can get really busy, but if I build everything with super simple shapes, then I think it kind of hits a nice balance for me where I like that look.
Nice.
And I'm using the Pathfinder tool a lot, which is up in the top left. I'm just using this intersect, so cutting out shapes as needed.
I've got a question actually. Going back to, I mean,
Yeah.
it's very much in your design space, and again, for trying to dig deep into your background. Any challenges that you find within this type of work? Maybe stuff that you've done previously, or yeah, for anyone who's maybe watched and have similar challenges, any advice as well based on those challenges you might have for us?
Yeah, I think animation and illustration have their own challenges that are separate. I think with animation, I started illustrating before I started animating. And so I feel as though I'm, 5 years ahead with illustration, where technically I can accomplish anything that I'm looking to do in Illustrator to a certain degree.
Mm,
Whereas there's still challenges that pop up from an animation standpoint where I don't know how to do that. I don't even know how to ask the question of, how do I go on Google and ask, how do I do this thing if I don't even know what I'm doing wrong, right? So I think it I've had that nice feeling. I don't know if anybody else has had this where you can look back a year into the past and think, man, I wouldn't have even known how to do this. And so that's been what's really fun about animation for me is just the journey and the learning of
mm.
wrapping my head around something that a few years ago I had no understanding of. So if you're looking at what I'm
Nice.
doing on After Effects and thinking there's no way, I don't know what he's doing, um, just spend time, work on projects, and you could get there too. With illustration, I think it's much more of about the style. It's
Mm,
about the timing, and so that's much more of how do I achieve from a conceptual standpoint? How do I communicate what my clients or what I want to achieve with this illustration? And so a lot of those questions I mentioned earlier about does this need a stroke? What are the colors that I can use to achieve this? It's much less technical, I'd say at this point.
nice. I'm
Does that
loving
answer
those
your question?
the jazz. Yeah, I mean I feel like it's because I'm always curious about again how folks operate in the space, but also for those who are watching who are not necessarily from a design background and they're just curious about this. It's those, like you made a good point, folks watching you do After Effects and moving at the speed of sound, right, and doing those little shortcuts and thinking how could I do this? It's the practice, right? And again watching the streams and going to events and just getting a feel for how people operate in that space. But I love that you've decided to focus on a passion project for this stream because also as well I mean it ranges the streams we do with clients and that's fine, but when it's a passion one, it's clear that you're interested in it, but also it encourages obviously other folks to get involved on their passion projects, right? I mean hopefully that's the key. So yeah, it's cool to hear your experience, dude.
Oh yeah, I think passion projects are a must. Actually, the way that I got started in animation was a few years ago. I did
Mm.
Inktober, and instead of doing ink drawings, I did an animation every day for 31 days, which
Wow, is that a thing,
look,
Inktober? I've never heard of this.
yep.
Okay.
It's similar to what's the type 36 days of type.
Yeah, I know
It's
that
just one of
one.
those
Yeah.
challenges where it's getting people to draw. And I think it's similar to what we're talking about, where let loose, you're going to have another drawing tomorrow. So if this one isn't perfect, that is
Nice.
a-okay.
I love that.
But I did that with animation, and because I kept finding myself going into a program like After Effects, and it looks very daunting.
Mm,
There's a lot going on, there's a lot to learn, and I would do a tutorial and I would, get busy and stop doing the tutorials and never work on a project of my own and come back to it a few months later. And, I remembered some of it, but it felt like I was starting back at, you know, step
mm,
one again. And so in challenging myself to do even just a simple animation every day, it really hammered home those fundamentals. And it was similar to working on this project where I would say, I want to learn how to make steam go up, or I want to learn how to make lines move, or I want to learn this, or I want to learn that. And you'd
mm.
find a tutorial and it really helped to solidify the impact of those tutorials because I was working on something of my own.
No, I think that's the key, right? As well, there's always a tutorial, or obviously, in our case with the streams, and even creative challenges that we do. There's always something that is covered in that Adobe space for, and the things that you're unsure about of how to do it. There's, and that's probably the easiest way to learn by watching someone do it live on a stream. So yeah, we've got a lovely comment, but also a question. So I want to throw two
Hmm?
at you. Well, the comment is a nice one from Chris. Basically agreed with what you were saying previously. And he said, I agree. I learn more from mistakes than anything else. Just have to dive into it and not be afraid.
I agree with that
Yeah,
wholeheartedly. Yep.
we echo that fully, which sometimes can be quite daunting, right? Because I don't know if about you, but as freelance, well, maybe creators, but maybe freelance space, perfectionists, right? A little bit. So it's we want to get it right first time, but that's not how the universe works. Maybe in this universe that you're creating, maybe that is a place. I don't know. I don't know. I don't make the rules. We've got a question from Keys who said, "Are there any projects you would like to collaborate on, Doug?" Good
With
question.
them?
I guess maybe because actually it's one of my questions I was going to ask you. So maybe an ideal client, let's say, is there a client like
Uh-huh.
that you would like to work with or collaborate with potentially?
Ah,
Big question,
YouTube
right?
has these little banners. They're called Doodles, I think. They're kind of like the Google Doodles. And I've been looking
Okay.
at those, and I think the artists that have worked on those are so talented, and they're little banners that animate for a few seconds and then go to the YouTube um,
Okay.
logo. And I think where my animation works the best is short form. So
Nice.
although I'm working on a personal project that's like 2 minutes long, I think that it would be great to work on projects that are shorter for web, for social media. So that would be my answer in terms of collaboration.
You shoot your shot on the chat for anyone who is in the YouTube space or anyone. And to be fair, I mean that's the beauty of social media, right? You do a stream where you put something online, you never know who's watching. And that's the beauty of being freelance, but you can also be quite selective, right, with the clients you work with. So yeah, it's great. Got a question or a comment from Keys again saying, if you would like to collaborate in general, or is there anything you would collaborate on? So maybe I think you kind of touched on that, maybe working on, the YouTube kind of style of work. So yeah, any final questions? We've got our very final 4 minutes, and then we'll do like a nice little wrap up for the day.
Yep.
So any last questions, get those in the chat.
Yeah, I think at this point, I take on personal projects and collaborations that interest me, either from a
Mm,
technical standpoint, something that's going to be within my wheelhouse, but still a challenge,
mm,
or I take on projects that interest me from a topic standpoint. So I mentioned I'm very interested in sci-fi.
mm.
Um, I like
Does that stem from like
cocktails,
young, from like you?
audiobooks.
Sorry, cocktails. I love that. Where did that
Cocktails,
come
yeah. I mean,
from?
I make cocktail menus in my spare time with my partner. We
Okay.
have a whole menu.
Oh wow.
Audiobooks, so like book covers. But yeah, I think a
Cool.
lot of things come from youth, right? I would say that a lot of my interests are kind of childlike, space and
Mm.
fantasy and uh,
I love that you elaborated on the cocktail menus because I straight went into, oh, you like to drink cocktails whilst designing futuristic work, which is totally fine. And if you don't, that's also totally fine. But yeah, I was just like, where are we going with this cocktail making? Yeah, it's
no,
lit.
I was just thinking of
Yeah.
personal projects that I've worked on, so that's definitely
Cool.
one of them.
Very cool. I can see you're adding some serious rocket power,
Huh?
like rocket boosters. Yeah. Okay.
And
If
again,
on
what I'm
speed,
thinking
go.
about while doing this is like which parts are going to move. So obviously, I think the ship is going to just be one single unit, except maybe the
Mm,
thrusters will kind of pulse. And then I'm thinking that the fire I want to be grouped because those I'm going to scale up and down to the beat of the music.
nice.
And these lines showing the movement will definitely move. And then the background is going to constantly be moving. And that's going to be the most complex part of this.
Nice. I've got to say, Doug, because we've literally got, and I know I've kept mentioning 10 minutes before we knew it, we're now down to 2 minutes. And I want to
Okay.
make sure that we can do, I mean, I would say a recap, but I feel like maybe the quickest recap, if you could, for 1 minute, but then also how
Yeah.
can folks know about you on the stream as well? Because it'd be good to know. So maybe like a very quick roundup of what we've done for
Yep.
today. Yeah.
So if you want to keep following along with my client work or with this project, check me out on Behance, Douglas Fuchs, or on Instagram at thepoint.studio. And today we went through Adobe Illustrator. We were talking about what I think about in order to animate, how to layer things, how I work with vectors, and then we pushed it all. We organized everything in After Effects, and we even worked on a little bit of animation to create a sci-fi animation.
Been a solid busy stream. And you know what? Because I'm not a monster, there is one final question in the chat, and I feel
Okay.
like a horrible person if I don't answer. So if you can answer it in 1 minute, then a bonus.
Yes.
We've got Jess who said, Doug, what inspires your illustrations? Big
I think
question. Here we go.
I think the interest in walking around and seeing the world around me and taking the parts, like I see flowers that have cool shapes and I think that looks alien almost. That doesn't even seem part of this world. So I take that and I maneuver it into my style and see how it looks.
Nice. I feel like we're living in your world, Doug, and then it's just like you see the world through like a different VR headset. But I love that. Dude, the chat has been popping off, and everyone's been absolutely loving your stream. So thank you so much for joining us. So that's it, my friends. That's a wrap up today. Hope you've enjoyed it. A massive thank you for tuning in, for the questions, for our Adobe team, of course. And just a little roundup. So next we have Adobe Spotlight episode featuring Photoshop instructor and founder of Pix Imperfect, Unmesh Dinder, who will be interviewed by the one and only Voodoo Val. So stay tuned, that's coming up next. So on that note, Doug, it's been a pleasure, dude, to host you. Hope you've enjoyed it. You enjoyed it?
Oh, it was a ton of fun. Yeah. Thank you everyone for the questions and thanks so much, Adobe.
Top lad. And we'll see you all very, very soon. Have a good one, guys. Take care. Ciao.